Welcome to the Power of Nature podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Waldo. In this show, I talk about how nature and the natural world can communicate with us, how it can communicate directly and individually with each of us, and how this can create immeasurable benefits for us in our lives. I share stories of my experiences doing this as part of a regular and ongoing practice, and I talk to others about their experiences with the power of nature as well. So join me as we go on a journey of learning about the power of nature, how it can communicate directly with us, and the impact that it can have on our own lives. Welcome back to the Power of Nature podcast. In today's episode, I'm talking about mountains, my relationship with mountains, and the role that mountains have played in my life. How mountains have communicated with me and really changed kind of how I feel in the world, how I feel like I am me and being me. I was considering yesterday the thought of what I might want to talk about in this episode, because I've kind of gotten on a loose schedule of publishing on certain days, and on some of my podcasts I have episodes that I've already recorded, but I didn't have one for the Power of Nature, and so I usually just kind of allow myself to let nature speak to me about what it's time to speak about. Mountains have been a very, very important part of nature for me for a long time, and I've kind of wondered when I would talk about them or what would trigger it. And really what triggered it was a thought yesterday, just a brief thought. Maybe mountains, maybe it's time. I figured I would wake up and see, and that's what happened. This morning I woke up and the phrase, "The mountains are calling and I must go," by John Muir came to me. This is a very common phrase that you see a lot on, art prints and all kinds of things. But it's really a quote that when I discovered it, because I hadn't really known it was out there until I don't know how many years ago. I guess when I really started to kind of try to understand, try to understand why I always felt drawn to the mountains. And then I ran across this quote. I guess maybe it was about 10 years ago. I'm sure I heard it before that, but when it really resonated with me was probably about 10 years ago. And I think what it was is I was really trying to understand my relationship with mountains and why the mountains have affected me so much. And then I saw that quote, and it just felt like it was speaking to me. It didn't really feel like a pithy kind of thing, like, oh yeah, the mountains are calling and I must go. I mean, it literally felt like the mountains are calling me. And I really must go. I really have no choice but to go. It's like I need to go for my soul's existence. I need to go to breathe. I need to go to function. I need to just go. I think that I had felt that way for a long time, but I didn't really understand it because there are a lot of other places that I felt like I had wanted to go to or been called to that I kind of was still distracted by. But here's the thing. I find and have found that over and over and over again, it is always the mountains that have returned me to a true sense of connection with myself, a true sense of okayness within myself. The mountains for me have been a place of fun for sure. A place of beauty, fun being snowboarding or snowball fights or adventures, in my 20s in having a ski cabin in Lake Tahoe and social stuff and fun snowboarding and later fun with my family and fun by myself in the snow. They've been a place of beauty where I've gone and just I'm in awe of how they look. But I think one of the most important things that they've been for me is a place of retreat, a place of reconnection, a place of soul connection. And really, what they have been is a key way that my own inner self has communicated with me, has gotten in touch with me. All of nature has been a way that my inner self has communicated with me. I've talked about this in all of my episodes so far. And there are many reasons for that. And it's because I believe that when we are in touch with the essence of nature, we are in touch with the same source, the same energy that is at the essence of us, the essence of our inner self. And our experiences in nature, because nature is wild and natural, is in sync with our own naturalness. And therefore, our inner self can communicate with us through nature. That's what this show talks all about, my experiences of this. But to me, I've found that the mountains have over and over and over again for me been a place where I find respite, a place where I find calm in the midst of confusing life events, a place where I find a retreat that is healing, is caring to me, and that helps me not only listen to myself, but helps me take care of and value myself, really. My experiences with the mountains when I'm not going to the mountains to be with other people is always about that. It's always me in solitude with the mountains and finding that my experiences when I'm alone in the mountains have an incredibly profound effect on me and how I am feeling, and it brings me back to a connection with myself. Brings me back often because many times I've found that my call to the mountains has been like a call home, a call to my core, a call to remembering myself, a call to remembering who I truly am, and a call to a feeling of centeredness and okayness, often after having experiences that I don't understand, often in the world or often with other people or situations. And the mountains are like a retreat. They're like a balm of healing that help me just soothe my weary soul and reconnect back to who I am and what is important. This morning you may hear my voice sounds a little froggy, and that's because I woke straight up and I felt so strongly about recording this so you could hear my kind of froggy morning voice. I don't know. The weather's been changing too, so I find that my voice gets a little froggy here in Montana when the weather changes. I'm going to take a sip of my tea because I have a gorgeous cup of tea right in front of me. That may help with my froggy throat, so hold on a second. Okay. I actually paused my recording because I took many sips. I also kind of got distracted by the sight of the mountain in front of me. I've talked in the show and all of my podcasts about how we live in Montana, and from my office, which is also my art studio, I look out on a mountain kind of across our front yard and across some fields. There are some houses that belong to neighbors, but there's a stand of trees and then there's a mountain right there. And I guess it's a few mountains really, but it always kind of looks like one. I call it the mountain. This morning, it's a gray day. The trees that are up close to me are black and almost look like silhouettes against a kind of a completely clouded sky. I do see some variation in the clouds, but not a lot. They're moving, as things here in this part of Montana often do. In this valley, I've talked about how the weather is always changing, especially right here at the kind of the base of the mountains. And we're not completely at the base, but I don't know. We're like, I don't know, maybe a mile or two away. I'm not exactly sure. Not far. But as I look out on the mountain, what I'm seeing today is a show. Nature's show. Nature's show for me today. Oop, I've got Art Cat here on my lap. She really wants to lay on me and she's purring. So if you hear purring, that is Art Cat, otherwise known as Kit Kat, and recently also renamed Chickpea because she's a little protein powerful punch of a cat. Not a punch, but she's small, but she's mighty. She's was a stray cat we took in. So you might hear her. So even as I've spoken, the mountain has changed. There is a layer of fog along kind of like the stand of trees that's at the base of the mountain in my view. And that's kind of a thicker band of fog. And then there's a more sparse band of fog through the middle of the mountain. And then it's very gray at the top. I can almost see the tops today. Sometimes I can't, but I can almost see them. And also, there are patches of snow. Not as much as we had about a week ago because we had some warm weather and a lot of the snow melted. A lot of the snow around us and on our property melted. There's just some patches now. The scene in front of me looks like an ever-changing Japanese painting. And what I mean by that is one of those paintings that kind of shows this like misty, mysterious, foggy kind of mountain tree scene. And this is something that I get to look at looking out of my office. The move to this property was really one of feeling like the mountains are calling and I must go. Like many changes in my life, like many experiences in my life, it's like I have gotten called to the mountains always. When I'm calling myself to live in some kind of a new way, it's a tuning back into listening to myself and listening to what my inner self is calling me to do. Now, I've talked in all of my shows about it's not like there is this force called my inner self that is telling me what it needs me to do. The thing about my inner self that I've discovered and learned is and experienced is that my inner self knows every thought, every feeling, every dream, every desire, every experience, good and not so good or not good, that I've ever had. All of that is what my inner self is aware of. And my inner self is the energy and the pure, unconditional love part of me. I believe it is my source, which I believe is connected to the source and is the source that is in each of us and is in nature. And it is, well, it is what I truly am. The am that I was before I was born into this physical body. This is what I believe. And the am that I will continue to be after. That am, I have discovered over and over and over again, has often been, how do I put this? Influenced. Confused. Believed that it is other things or that it doesn't even exist at times. So many times I've discovered And it's just become so much more clear recently how so many of us live such an outer directed life. What do I mean by that? I mean a life that is directed by that which is outside of us, often meaning other people, historical precedents, cultural norms, cultural beliefs, that kind of thing. And just because that is where others are and where history has been and where culture has been in practice I've discovered, does not mean that is what I am. Over and over and over again, over my life, I've woken up to the realization that what I thought was me and what is truly me are often not the same thing. What is truly me is something different and deeper than those cultural norms, than those ways of living that I learned by other people or by institutions or by past convention. And like layers of an onion, what I have found on my journey of listening to myself is that as I go on and on in this journey, I've kind of shed those layers, kind of like pulling off layers of the onion, layer after layer of realizing those weren't really me. How the mountains play into this is that I have found for me that mountains have been an amazing place that helps me do this, that helps me get clarity, that helps me experience a sense of knowing and connection with kind of like an underneath it all me that often at times I've not even been aware of. That is what I call my inner self. And I believe that everyone has an inner self and everyone has the capacity to tune into their inner self in the same way that I talk about if they want to. I find that the more that I tune into my inner self, the more things in me make sense. My inner self also helps me understand a lot about the outer world. It is my inner self, time and time again, that has helped me navigate the outer world, the actions of other people that I haven't understood, the things in culture that haven't made sense. And the mountains and my inner self have helped me understand what I truly am. The mountains have helped me understand layers, like layers of the onion, of beliefs and thoughts and a sense of identity of myself that I thought was me, that I later come to realize wasn't. And my inner self is the constant that has always been there, guiding me to help me become aware of this, become awake to this and to navigate it all, even when it feels very confusing, and especially when it feels very confusing. I have a placard on my window that says, on my window ledge, right in the middle, that says, "The mountains are my happy place." It's filled with my window ledge is filled with other natural things. I have some beautiful feathers from our chickens and some feathers from hawks from over the years. I have a beautiful piece of a birch tree from our property. I have a piece of wood that's beautiful, and I have some of my own art. But in the middle of all of that is this thing that I bought from a local store. It's this little wood placard that says, "The mountains are my happy place." And it's kind of there as like a constant reminder. And it's not that the mountains are this like place where I always experience a sense of happy in kind of like when I think of the word happy, I kind of see people that are dancing around and they're kind of all excited and they're all happy. And I have many experiences like that in the mountains. Snowboarding, coming in to the mountains in the summer, just seeing the beauty. But to me, the mountains are my happy place. The happy that I resonate with in that phrase is less about that kind of happy and more like the kind of happiness that comes from a deep sense of feeling okay no matter what. It's like, the mountains have called me, and I have gone, and I have sat in them, and I have looked at them, and in doing so, the mountains have communicated with me in connection with my inner self, things that I've been calling myself to know, things I've been calling myself to remember, things I've been calling myself to wake up to about who I am and what I truly want. And to me, that's the happy that I'm talking about. It can be a jumping up and down, excited happy. But to me, it's more than that, because that's only kind of one side of the coin. What I'm talking about is the mountains have been a place that have taken me from confusion to some clarity. Not always, overnight. It's not like I go to the mountains and I'm like completely confused, and then I come out of the mountains and everything is 100% clear. It's not like that. Sometimes it is. Sometimes I'm just like, boom, it's just complete clarity. But more often than not, it's been the repetition of going to the mountains and just letting the mountains be like a balm on my weary soul for confusion and things that I might have experienced in the world. Maybe fears of things that I want to do that I didn't know how to do them or if I could do them. And yet the mountains somehow speak to me. They kind of right my ship, if you will. They kind of center me once again. And in that centeredness and in that writing that happens, not writing, although I do a lot of writing in the mountains for sure, journaling, but more like writing a ship, like, steering it, having it not tip over, having it be in balance, be in flow, be in sync. All of these words are the things that the mountains do for me. The feeling of happy in the phrase, the mountains are my happy place. It's a feeling of connection with myself, connection with my own truth, connection with my own energy, and ultimately connection with my own power. Not the kind of power that one needs to use to yield on other people or yield over other people or influence other people with. It has nothing to do with any of that. It has to do with the energy and the power that is mine, in which I listen to myself about who I am at the deepest level, what I already am and I already have been, and what it is I want to experience in this thing called life. What kinds of things I want to experience and what kinds of things I want to know. I find that the mountains over and over and over again are a place that help me wake up to that knowing within myself. And that is led by my inner self and the mountains, I believe, working in sync and in harmony. To me, the mountains are also, it's not just the soil and the rock and the structure. That's a big part of it, for sure. But it's also what's on the mountains. Trees, forests, wildlife, birds, and other creatures, all living in harmony. But there's something about, at the core, the energy of a mountain that I don't feel when I'm in a place that doesn't have mountains. I always feel something off when I'm too far away from mountains. I always feel like I'm I don't know, like a person wearing somebody else's clothes, or I've got like somebody else's shoes on or something like that. It feels off to me. Growing up in Pennsylvania, growing up in the central part of Pennsylvania, we didn't have huge mountains, but we did have the Allegheny Mountains, a mountain range that's smaller. And I spent, my time growing up in a town, often where, the various things that would kind of call me with horses, because I rode horses as a kid. It was my passion to farms that were in the valleys that had mountains around, or to kind of do any kind of shopping, we would head among the mountains to the town of State College, home of Penn State University, and you would go up over the mountain, up through the mountains to get there. In my early days, these experiences with the mountains being around me were really key. Later in my early 20s, after college, I returned home for a period after an experience in Europe, and I was at a very lost place. And the mountains, I've talked about this in the show, the mountains of Pennsylvania called me again to find my way in a state of being in which I felt very confused about what I had experienced and what had happened. It was a place once again of retreat and reconnection. Interestingly enough, it was going to the mountains in Pennsylvania at that time period. And I would be remiss if I also didn't say that during my time in Europe, one of the most amazing experiences I had of really seeing mountains was going into the French Alps in France, going into a town called Chamonix for the first time and seeing the French Alps. I had never seen mountains like that before, and there were some things that happened on that trip that prior to that were very disorienting, very confusing, and going into the mountains once again it was like a retreat. It was like a reconnection of my soul, of me to me and my own inner knowing. And then it was after that I traveled around a little more, and then I lived in Rome, Italy, and then I went back to Pennsylvania, to my hometown where I had not lived all through college, and then that's where I went back to the mountains again, living with my mom and my dad, a recent college grad, trying to figure out what I was doing and listening to the mountains around me once again. And those mountains spoke to me once again, as they always do. And they called me to move to California, to San Francisco. What I didn't realize at the time, I knew that I was being called to move to San Francisco for a lot of reasons. The beauty, the coast, a way of living that I feel like was very informed by a way of living that I wanted to do, that I feel like was very informed by my time living in Rome. The Roman way is a way of savoring and slowing down. These are not practices and qualities that I learned growing up, and it was something I learned in Rome. And when I came back to the United States, kind of kicking and screaming because I really wanted to stay and live in Rome, I tried to seek Italian residency or dual citizenship because my grandfather was born there, but it didn't work out. So I was trying to find a place in the United States that was similar, and I was called by my inner self to move to San Francisco. But what's interesting is that while my experiences in San Francisco I would not trade for the world, it didn't take me long before I discovered that one of my favorite things about living in California was the mountains in the Sierra Nevadas. The first time I went to the Sierra Nevadas to Lake Tahoe, well, I saw them when I drove through on my way to San Francisco, and I felt the resonance. I felt like I was home. But I also felt at that time like I wasn't being called to live there then. I moved to San Francisco, and what I found was that it wasn't long before I was called to the mountains in Lake Tahoe, which is about 3 to 4 hours away without traffic. And I was called there initially for skiing and then later snowboarding. But really the mountains became, as always, a place that I would go as much as I could. Go because I felt I had to. Go even when there was no one to go with. I organized a ski cabin, and often nobody I knew kind of in my normal friend circle skied or snowboarded. Back then I started, when I was there, I was skiing. I wasn't snowboarding initially, but nobody skied. So I would just have these other people in my ski cabin, and they kind of had their own schedules. So I would just drive up by myself. I would just get in my car and drive up by myself to Lake Tahoe and stay. And then I would hook up with these other people that were in my ski cabin and go skiing with them. But there was something more than just skiing back then. To me, it was just being in the mountains. It was like a coming home. I felt it. I felt it back then. I didn't understand it, though. I didn't understand so much the call of my own soul and the call of my own inner self and the role that mountains play in kind of who I really am. I mean, I did at one level. I knew that I loved the mountains, but I don't think I understood just how essential and core they are to me, like oxygen. What I found was that I would spend as much time skiing in those days as I could. As many weekends as I could. I would meet other people in their 20s, and they'd be like, yeah, I went out, to Tahoe 10 times or whatever. And I would give some kind of number of how many days I was up there. And people's eyes would get big because basically every spare moment I was in the mountains. And what I noticed early on in those days was that when I would come back from the mountains, I would always feel a sense of sadness. I didn't understand it for the longest time. I would be in the mountains and just feel a sense of homeness. And then it didn't feel right for me to try to move there. It felt like I, for whatever reason, needed to live in the city at that time. But my soul was always kind of still connected to the mountains, and I would always feel it every single drive back. I might be excited about the work that I was doing or social things that I had coming up, but I always knew I would go back to the mountains. It's like it was my home, my beacon. There was a period of time where, still living in California, I didn't go to the mountains as much. After the .com crash, I had switched to snowboarding, but I which I loved and did as much as I could. And then there was a period before I left California, actually, where I didn't go much to the mountains, at least not in the winter time. Maybe I took some summer trips. And then my dad died, and my husband, we had recently gotten married right before my dad died, like the month before. And I, after a number of months of kind of being very confused about the world, and we both wanted a change, we made a decision to move to Pennsylvania. Not to the town where I grew up in, but to Philadelphia, which seemed like Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is in the eastern part of the state. I was actually born in the western part of Pennsylvania, and then I grew up in the central center of the state of Pennsylvania. So the eastern part was not a part I was that familiar with, aside from my sister had gone to college there. So I had flown in and out of Philadelphia a few times, but otherwise the reason we picked Philadelphia was because it seemed like a place that would be affordable to buy a home and start a family, but primarily because it seemed like a place where we could live and be in a more urban environment, and yet be a driving distance from my family, which was a couple of hours away, about 3 hours away. So we moved to Philadelphia, and Philadelphia and that part of Pennsylvania did not really have any mountains. I remember the first time we went to the Poconos, we drove to the Poconos, and I had gone to the Poconos as a kid on family vacation. And I thought I would get my mountain fix. And after living in California and seeing really big mountains, going to Washington State and going up to Mount Rainier, seeing the French Alps, going to Yosemite, and seeing other big mountains in California, and of course, the Sierra Nevadas and Lake Tahoe. Around Lake Tahoe, the Poconos seemed kind of like little hills. And they weren't, right in our neighborhood. We had to drive to get there. So I knew some part of me, when we realized that, was not going to be able to stay in Philadelphia for long. I started feeling a call to move to the mountains, or to be closer to bigger mountains once again. This went on for a number of years. I was in Philadelphia for 8 years, I think it was. And then there was a time period where my mom got sick, and over a 12-month period she was sick, and then she died. And we kind of stuck around in Philadelphia for a little while until we found a way back to California. And one of the big draws was being closer to the mountains. And Yet I still didn't know how to live in the mountains or really, really close to the mountains. In 2018, before I started my very first podcast, I went on a weekend, a solo weekend trip for my birthday. I felt called to go to the mountains yet again, for clarity, for a retreat. I had been experiencing a lot of confusion and unhappiness in my life, and I needed to know what was going on and what to do. And I went to the mountains for the weekend for my birthday, all by myself. And it was the first time I had ever, since having my kids, that I had ever gone by myself completely to stay like at an Airbnb and just be in the mountains and journal and just soak it up in Lake Tahoe. I had such an amazing experience that weekend, and as I was coming back home, I say home, but it wasn't really home. Going back to, we lived in the East Bay of San Francisco, the San Francisco Bay Area at that time, not in the city. But as I was heading back to the San Francisco Bay Area, away from the mountains and away from Lake Tahoe, I just started crying. I just cried and cried. Not because I didn't want to see my family, I did. But I didn't want to leave the mountains. It's like I had reconnected with a part of my soul again. And yet I was feeling a call once again to leave those mountains. Kind of like in my 20s when I was in the ski cabin and I would go back to the city and leave the mountains until the next time I could get back there. After that time, my husband and I actually tried to move to Lake Tahoe. It did not work out. But it was always a dream to live where I wouldn't have to drive 3 hours to be in the mountains, or that I would have really big mountains around me, because growing up in Pennsylvania, I did have mountains around me. We did have small mountains. It wasn't like Philadelphia. We had the Appalachian Mountains around us, but they were small. And I really wanted big mountains, and I wanted to live in a place where I could experience big mountains around me. We couldn't figure out how to make that happen, so I started once again going to Lake Tahoe as much as I could. We also, spent a lot of time camping in the summer in mountains, going to Mount Lassen in the very far northern part of California, going to Yosemite, which I had been to, going to Sequoia National Forest, going to other forested places, but often to the mountains. And then in the winter, going to Lake Tahoe as much as possible. I would just go by myself. My kids and my husband did not want to snowboard. I taught everyone, my kids how to snowboard, and my husband had learned from me how to snowboard years before, and they didn't want to go as much as I did, so I would just go almost every weekend in the winter. My dream was to live in the mountains, but I didn't know how to make it work. And then in 2020, COVID hit. And we ended up, after a period of time, having an opportunity to rent an RV and visit Montana. and I was called to Montana, and I thought, wow, this could work. We tried to move here and it did not work out in 2020. We ended up going back to our home in California, still in the midst of COVID and lockdowns that resumed. And we ended up for a period of time actually going to the state of Nevada, just over the California state line, and living in our RV that we then bought, and kind of doing everything remotely during that period, and being near the mountains, the other side of the Sierra Nevadas. This really fed my soul. I feel like it was amazing. It was really hard living in 35 feet of an RV after living in a house. We still had our house in California. We were just staying in this RV. But it was hard to live in such a small amount of space. But we had an amazing spot looking right at the mountains. And there was a beautiful trail that I would take and walk on by myself and with my dog, with the mountains all around me. And it was like a balm for my soul once again. But then a call came to return back to California, to return to our home. And then it was a call to leave California, to leave the Bay Area, and to sell our house and to head out into lands and to places and destinations that we weren't sure of. We knew we wanted to try to get back to Montana, but we didn't know if that was in the cards. The housing market was really challenging in Montana, starting in that year. But we ended up packing up all of our things and leaving our house in California, putting it on the market, and putting all of our items in storage, downsizing a lot, and moving our entire family, including all of our animals, into a 35-foot Class A RV, and setting off to Destination Unknown, which eventually became Destination Montana. We returned to Montana, and after a number of challenging months of trying to look for a house and feeling like it was not going to happen. There's a lot to this story. We were in the midst of winter and it had gotten really cold. We had all gotten sick in our RV because I think our RV didn't have the best ventilation for being in such cold temperatures. And it was during COVID, so we weren't really able to kind of be out. I think our immune systems were down. There's a lot of reasons for that. But it ended up happening that right when we were ready to give up, we found this property where I now sit that overlooks this mountain. This property where we live in this valley where we are surrounded on all sides by mountains. Mountains that are snow-capped and have fog. The mountain range that is in front of us leads into Canada. It's part of the Rocky Mountain system. We also live very close to Glacier National Park, so if you've ever seen the mountains there, you know the scale of the kinds of mountains that I'm talking about. These days, when I do simple things like drive to Costco or to Lowe's or just to get groceries, there are mountains that surround me. I remember the first time driving back to our RV after going to the store And there were these mountains covered at the top with snow, and it looked like a painting. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. We get to live here. To me, as I've talked about, the mountains have been a place of retreat, a place of awakening, a place of reawakening to a deep connection with my own soul and my heart and what I truly love and who I truly am. And I think that the mountains are that for many of us. I think there is a pulsating energy in the mountains themselves, a strength of the formations, the energy that created the formation of rocks and dirt, a strength and a power that I feel like is a powerful energetic draw to the core of what we really are at the center of each of us. If you're a mountain lover, maybe you understand what I'm talking about. These days, my appreciation for the mountains, well, it's always been about taking photographs. I've taken photographs over the years of the mountains. I see a view and I just can't take it in enough. It's just so beautiful. I try to capture it with the camera, but the camera never captures what I truly see and feel. But I've tried. But since living in Montana, I felt a call to another passion, which is a call to my own inner self, which is embracing my creativity. And I've learned to listen to that call and listen to what is inspiring me, which time and time again, so many times, is the mountains. I have an office here full of paintings, some small, 5x7, 8x10, many large, 4 foot by 3 foot, maybe. I don't know if that's the biggest size or not. Lots of sizes in between, 24 by 36. But I will say that all of them, almost all of them, at this point, have been inspired by mountains. The mountains around me, the mountains I've visited, the mountains that I've seen, the mountains I've dreamed of. Because I find that the mountains over and over and over again are such a deep part of who I am at my core. I have a soul connection with mountains. The mountains are my happy place, but not just a place for excitement and jubilee and fun, but a place for okayness and all rightness and centeredness and peace and a coming back to clarity of all that I am and an awareness and a connection with all that is. And to me, the mountains are just so powerful. And I don't think there's anything else I can say in this episode, at least, on the power of mountains and the impact that they have had on my life. So I'm just going to leave it at that until the next time. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Power of Nature podcast. To learn more about me and my other offerings, you can visit my website at michellewaldo.com. That's MICHELLEWALDO.com.